The CheckLine Codeunit. If you look at the CheckLine Codeunit from a typical point of view, you will see different triggers in there. There is an on-run trigger, so a Codeunit can be executed by running the Codeunit, then the on-run trigger is called. But in the case of CheckLine, the on-run trigger is almost never executed directly. It's only in here for backwards compatibility with previous versions. In the CheckLine Codeunit, we will find the run check function. And the run check function is the one that you will call, and it will do the actual checking of the journal line record. The very first thing it will do is check if the journal line is not empty. If it's empty, then we stop. And this is performed via an empty line function, which we can find in the journal line table. If there is an error, then typically this Codeunit will use the field error function instead of the error function, because with field error we have more flexibility. It's very important to understand that this Codeunit does not have any user interface, and it will also never read or update the journal table. This can be a little bit confusing. How can a Codeunit check a journal line if we can never read or update it? Well, the answer is very simple. We will receive the journal line record that we need to check as a parameter via reference. So which means that we can work on it in memory and we never have to go and do a select on the database. Also very important is that this Codeunit has no user interface. If everything goes well, it will return OK. If not, an error will be thrown. Here we have an example of a CheckLine Codeunit. And as the example, I'm using the resource journal line CheckLine Codeunit because the posting routines for resource journals are relatively easy to understand. What we notice is that there is an on-run trigger defined in this Codeunit. And this on-run trigger is almost never called. It's only in here for backwards compatibility. And even if you call the on-run trigger, it will be the run check function, which will be executed. So if you have a look at the code in the run check function, what we notice is that it receives the records resource journal line via a parameter. So let me have a look and zoom in a little bit on and in the code. All right. This journal line records is the one that this function will be working on by using a with do begin statement. The very first thing it will do is then call the empty line function, and if this function returns true, we exit, we no longer continue. If empty line is not true, then we continue, and you notice a number of test fields are performed to verify that certain fields are not empty. We test whether the contents of a field match a given value. We do that for the resource number, the posting date, and a posting group. Next, we will verify if, for example, the posting date is a normal date or not. And if it's not a normal date, we throw an error message. And in this case, we use the field error function. And the field error function behaves like the error function, it also stops. But we can throw an error about a field, in this case the posting date, and the text constant. And in this case, I'm using a text constant, and the message will be cannot be a closing date. And because we are also passing in the posting date into this function, the message will be posting date cannot be a closing date. And the posting date field will also be translated, so it's a multi-language function. All right. And now we see a typical part in the code that we will find in every CheckLine Codeunit. And here we will verify. We're using two variables, a from variable and the to variable. We empty those variables, and then we have a look in the user setup table by making use of the user ID, if there is of course a user ID available. Why? Because in the user setup there might be two dates for which, or in between, this user is allowed to do postings. If there are dates for this user in the user setup table, then we use those. If there is not any information in the user setup table, then we go and have a look in the general ledger setup table, because, for example, our accountant or a manager might also have some from and to dates in there. So if we find dates in there, we'll use those. If there is no information in the user setup and we can't find anything in the general ledger setup table, what we will then do is we will use to default dates, an empty date for the from, and in this case the 31st of December for the to dates. All right. Then we will verify if the posting date is in between the from and to dates. If it's not, we'll also throw an error, in this case using text constant 001, and this will say the posting date is not within the allowed range of posting dates. That's the error that we throw. Now we know that the posting date is okay. We'll also verify if the document date is a normal date. In this case, we'll also verify the entry type, because we are posting, in this case, a resource journal line. We might also need to post a corresponding timesheet and check that one. Then there is some code and it verifies the combination of dimensions we might have available. I will not go into details in here. And then the CheckLine code unit is ready. So to summarize, the CheckLine code unit calls the empty line to verify the line is not empty. We then also verify some other fields which should not be empty, and we take some time to verify if the posting date is in between or ranges of dates that we are allowed to post in, and which might have been set up in the user setup table or the general ledger setup table.